Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Global Landscapes Digital Summit on forest bathing. We're very happy to have you all with us today, and I think it's going to be a wonderful summit. We have great speakers who I will introduce, and they'll introduce themselves in just a minute. But first, we'll introduce the topic of forest bathing, which was first coined by the Japanese as shinrin-yoku, and it's the act of spending intentional time in a forest with the purpose of improving your health, physical, mental, and spiritual. And in theory, it's quite simple. It's just a few hours spent walking and observing and being quiet. But research has shown that in this time, we come into contact with all the oils that trees emit and the bacteria found in forests and the negative ions that fill the air, which all boost our serotonin levels and decrease our cortisol, which makes us more happy and less stressed. And it lowers our blood pressure, it helps our immune system, and gives us better sleep. And beyond that, forest bathing is also about just getting back in touch with nature and engaging deeply with all of our senses and reinvigorating our creativity and imaginations, and just relaxing in the arms of Mother Earth. So today we're going to hear from our three experts on this topic. And as they're discussing, please feel free to introduce yourselves to each other in the chat room, and feel free to put forward some questions, which my colleague will be collecting throughout the course of this discussion. And then at the end, I can put forward your questions to the speakers as well. And so to introduce our three speakers, we have first Dr. Qing Li, who's a medical doctor at the Nippon Medical School in Tokyo and the world's foremost expert in forest medicine. So we're so happy he could join us today. And he's been a visiting fellow at the Stanford University School of Medicine and has a leading role in a number of medical and health organizations, serving as a founding member and chairman of the Japanese Society for Forest Medicine. His book, Forest Medicine, was published in 2012 as the first textbook of its kind in the United States, and his book on forest bathing, which is called Forest Bathing: How Trees Can Help You Find Health and Happiness, was published last year by Penguin Random House. So we're so happy to have you, Dr. Ching, and would you like to briefly introduce yourself and your research?
Hello, my name is Qing Li. I'm a medical doctor at the rehabilitation department. Thank you very much for introducing me. In fact, I have studied the effect of forest bathing on human health from 2003, and I conducted many studies so far on the forest bathing. I have established a new medical science, forest medicine. I have found that forest bathing has many beneficial effects on human health. For example, forest bathing can reduce blood pressure. Forest bathing can lower your stress and stress hormone, can boost the immune system with the increase in natural killer activity, and increase the anti-cancer protein production. They also can increase the activity of parasympathetic nerve. We also call the rest or recover part, and reduce the activity of sympathetic nerves, also known as the fight or flight part. Forest bathing also can improve cardiovascular and metabolic health, and lift depression, improve energy. This is so far I conducted those studies. Now I'm still conducting some research on forest bathing. For example, I try to establish the preventive method of lifestyle related diseases. Use the forest bathing. For example, prevention for the hypertension, prevention for the depression, and something like lifestyle related diseases. And another research is because my major is rehabilitation. So I would like to do something on the application of forth Beijing in rehabilitation medicine. It's okay? Thank you.
We're so excited to hear more about your research, Dr. Ching. And then next we have Sibylle Roth, who is currently pursuing her Ph.D. at the University of Freiburg in Germany. She is focusing her research on the concept of Muße within forests, and that's a German term that she'll explain more in just a minute. Her background is in social science and outdoor education, and she serves as a board member of the European Institute for Outdoor Adventure Education and Experiential Learning. So Sibylle, could you please introduce yourself further and also introduce us to the concept of Muße?
Certainly, I will try. So yeah, my name is Sibylle Roth, and I'm part of the CRC 1015 Otium within Freiburg, which focuses on boundaries, chronotopes, and practices of Muße. And it's a research collaboration which already exists for 3 years and has been working on Muße for the last 3 years already. So my work is focusing on Muße within forests, and Muße is a German concept, as Gabrielle just said, which I assume is related to an individual time and place perception within forests. So within my project with the working title Muße in the Forest, constructing a concept in history and presence, I am looking to the contemporary meaning of forest as a place and space for contemplation and leisure for the individual. So my project is based on a microsociological approach, aims to analyze the individual construction of forests as a potential space for Muße. So I want to analyze how individual perception and interpretation of forests as a place for Muße is seen. The focus lies on identifying processes and factors that influence such a construction. So Muße, on the one hand, is specifically possible if certain situations allow breaking out of everyday rhythms. So more cyclical time experiences than linear ones. On the other hand, the experience of Muße is connected to places. So one part of the project focuses on the history, which is my colleague doing, where we look at discourses and which potentially leading to Muße of individuals. And my part of the project looks on the individual level in the present. So how do we experience and how do we perceive and interpret the place for forests? So the subject, it's everyday life, is the focus of my studies. How does everyday life look like, and what socio-demographic background do the participants taking part in my studies have to bring along? Also questions like which role does forest play or did play in your childhood, so when you grow up, and all these answers to this question will hopefully allow me to analyze the very individual construction of Muße spaces within the forest. So I assume the specific framing amongst the discourses, which are coming from the historical part of the project, is this construction. And tell you a bit more about Muße. So Muße describes a long-standing concept that has been transported to the ancient world. So in ancient times, it was seen as the opposite of working sphere. So whereas work in modern sense was done by slaves, free citizens and aristocrats had enough freedom to undertake practical activities like philosophy, politics, military and trade. And Muße, as a state of freedom from work and therefore freedom of purpose, was the foundation for these practical activities. So in this sense, Muße was positively connected and privileged to those who could afford not to work. So a life in Muße was the highest goal to reach. This changed during times in Protestantism. There was a life in work which was worth striving for. So we had shifts back and forwards, even towards the understanding of Muße as idleness and laziness, which it isn't. There is another German word which is Müßiggang, which is idleness and more to laziness. But the reason why I'm using the German word Muße is because there is no real English translation for it. So this concept of Muße has been discussed ever since. First and foremost, Muße is personal time perceived as precious. So in a state of Muße, we assume there is no external purpose, no external structure of meaning. So what is done in Muße is done for it and in itself. Rational time structures, as well as the target of performance orientation, which organize our everyday life, can therefore fade into the background. So this connects Muße with the concept of freedom, where freedom of duty or purpose, as well as freedom to do something, guide human actions. So productivity or even work, in this not excluded, but when it comes to Muße, this productivity is strictly marked as an end in itself. So if you do something, you do it not for whatever it is you do it for the reason of just doing it. So it can be understood as a state of mental openness, where on the one hand, thoughts can flow, and on the other hand, a high concentrated focus is possible. So taking lack of purpose, time experience, freedom and openness into consideration, Muße, as we understand in this research, takes some positive connotation as well. So just to finish up, so Muße can be understood as a state that individuals experience in time of self-determination and self-regulation. With this experience, individuals can follow their own interests in the peace in their own time. Muße therefore explains a certain empty space and time when it comes to the perception of those. So even though Muße is subjectively constructed, we believe that there are cultural discourses and aspects that have imprinted the individual's understanding of this concept. And I'm interested in how the discussion develops, because Muße can be part of forest paths, for example. So within the forest path, Muße can be perceived, but it does not have to be. So I'm excited to see how we can bring this together and work on it and see where it goes.
Great, thank you, Sybilla. I like the idea that our time spent in Muße and in forest bathing is not idle at all. It's not laziness. It's very interactive, and it's just a different form of being active than we typically use in our daily life. So thank you for sharing on that. And then we have Julia Plevin, who is joining us from California. And she works at the intersection of nature, writing, and design in a number of ways. She runs a design studio called Murmafly that works on everything from interior design to brand strategy to communications and marketing, all founded in a holistic ethos of inclusivity and healing. And she is the founder of San Francisco's Forest Bathing Club, which has been a huge success. And she also wrote a book on forest bathing that was just published by Penguin Random House as well, called The Healing Magic of Forest Bathing. There it is. It has a beautiful cover. So Julia, please tell us about your work and what you're doing.
Cool, thank you. So I first came into forest bathing as a design student living in New York City. And I've always loved being in nature, but it wasn't until living in New York City that I realized the mental health effects of being disconnected from nature. And that I realized that so much of my own anxiety and stress stemmed from that disconnection. And then I came across a researcher, Glenn Albrecht, who has this whole umbrella of terms called psychoterapia, which refers to the ways that it's earth-related mental health distress. So there's all of these ways that our disconnection from nature affects our mental health. And there's a lot of terms for this, including anxiety, eco-paralysis, solastalgia, which is a loss of solace for a place you never left, and the list goes on. And here in our, we consider seasonal affective disorder, like when you get sad in the winter, as the only way that nature affects our mental health, but actually there's so many ways because we are in fact nature. So whenever what's happening to nature is happening to us because we live in these cycles. And as I started to realize that as a designer, which is how I'm always thinking, you have all the, okay, so this is the problem, but what is the solution? And for me, the question became, how do we reconnect to nature? And what does it mean to reconnect to nature? And that's why I started the Forest Bathing Club, because it was my own healing, my own way to connect. And I really just wanted to see if anyone else was also interested in doing this with me. And it's been an amazing journey to see just how many people also feel this disconnection and crave the reconnection with nature. I also realized in doing this that I was, stepping outside myself and acting on behalf of the forest, and really a voice of the forest saying, hey, the forests are calling for our attention. They, this is this urgent time on planet Earth where we can't just go on living as we've been living in this extractive way. And so I believe that as we support this reconnection to the forests, we're helping people rebuild or recreate relationship with nature, which is important, to love nature and have relationship with nature in order to want to, care about it and save it and honor it. And so that's been a big part of my journey too, and of understanding that these forests are conscious and they're calling out to us. Another way that I'd say the design aspect is really important to me is a lot of times we talk about like sustainability in design, and it's either, you're choosing what's good for the earth, or you're choosing like what's good for humans, human-centered design. And I believe that if we're doing human-centered design and we're not taking this holistic perspective of what's also good for the planet, then we're not actually doing human-centered design, because in reality, humans are part of this larger, network, and we're not at the center. We're just one piece of this beautiful web of all of Earth. Mm-hmm. That's what drives a lot of my work, from both the as an eco-spiritual guide leading the Forest Bathing Club, and then as a designer, and then writing about it too.
Mm-hmm. Of course, your book was wonderful. And I think I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning of this discussion, but my name is Gabrielle Lipton, and I am the editor of Landscape News, which is the news agency of the Global Landscapes Forum. And so now moving into questions for our speakers, we will start at the beginning. I have a question for Dr. Ching. So forest bathing was first coined by the Japanese in the 1980s as shinrin-yoku, primarily as a way to reduce stress in such a work-intensive culture. But forests have always been a big part of Japanese culture, and they cover 2/3 of the entire country. So I'm wondering if shinrin-yoku has always been a part of Japanese culture, and it was just kind of rebranded in the 1980s to fit modern needs, or if shinrin-yoku and forest bathing really is a new concept that first came about in the 1980s.
Yes, in fact, the shinrin-yoku is a traditional and a new concept in Japan. For the traditional, because shinrin-yoku is a part of Japanese culture from the old time. And in Japan, there are a lot of forests, and also people, lots of Japanese love the nature, love the forest. However, after I proved the beneficial effect of the shinrin-yoku, so the shinrin-yoku changed it from a feeling to a science. So it became a new concept. I will explain something. So In fact, the forest environment has been enjoyed by people for a long time because the quiet atmosphere, the beautiful scenery, the calm climate, and the fresh, clean air in the forest. Also, special good smell. So, in fact, in 1984, maybe you know the word techno stress. Techno stress was coined to describe the unhealthy behavior around the new technology. In fact, in Japan also, about 50% work under the anxiety and stress in 1982 from the 1980s. So shinrin-yoku may reduce stress and have a relaxation effect. Therefore, walking in forest parks may have beneficial effect on human health. So, based on those background, the Japanese government in Japan, the Japanese government proposed a new program. We call it shinrin-yoku. This is a national health program for forest-based or shinrin-yoku. It's began to be introduced in 1982 for the purpose of the stress management for the worker in Japan. In fact, shinrin in Japanese means forest. Yoku means bus. So shinrin-yoku means bathing in the forest atmosphere or taking the forest through our senses, 5 senses. It's not exercise, not hike. When you slow walk, it's simply being nature, connecting with nature through our 5 senses, sense of the sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. So this is the shinrin-yoku is a traditional and a new concept, both traditional, also a new concept in Japan, also in the world. It's okay?
Yeah, thank you. That's great context for us to start off on. So Julia, in your book, one of the things that I loved about it is you include an enormous array of indigenous knowledge, going to Japan, as Dr. Ching described, and other parts of the world as well. And you sought out a number of traditional knowledge holders and healers in your research. So what is your understanding through that research of the history of forest bathing? Has it always been a part of indigenous cultures and identities?
Yeah, so it's a really big question. And I would say that I consider myself really a student of all of this, you know, and there's people, I'm learning it, and there's people of indigenous wisdom keepers who've been holding this wisdom for generations and generations. For me, as I started to do my research into forest bathing, and I saw the term, as Dr. Li mentioned, was from the 80s, really the concepts go a lot further. And they're so deeply embedded in Japanese culture, you know, everything from haiku, which is about, you know, observing nature, ikebana, the flower arrangement, which is the idea that you can have the entire universe, you know, contained in a flower. It goes back all the way to the Shugendo Buddhist monks who lived in the mountains and got aesthetic powers through being in nature and really understand believe that stones and trees and everything in nature has a consciousness and a power. And then what I realized was, as I did more research, was I started to see parallels across many different cultures. So in New Zealand, the Maori, I went to visit the Waipua forest, some of the most ancient kauri trees, and they're actually part of their origin stories is these trees, and they believe in the spirit of the trees. And similarly, the Achuar people in the Amazon believe in the spirit of the trees. And so there's these things that are different indigenous groups that have had no contact with each other, all have these similar understandings of nature and of the the sacredness of the earth. And I think at this point, you know, we're at an amazing point on planet Earth where we have so much science, and I'm so grateful that we have all of this science to show the healing benefits of nature. But it's stuff that these indigenous groups have known forever, and it's people who've never lost that connection. So they've remained connected, and they've held these beliefs even through times when it meant like persecution. You know, even when it was dangerous to hold these beliefs, and they have held on to them so that we can now learn so much from these ways of living. And, you know, all of our medicine ultimately comes from the earth. Like, we go to the Amazon and we find plants that have healing properties and we extract it. We don't ever consider the holistic idea of just being in the forest, you know, and the healing of that. And so I really do believe that every culture has its this understanding, and you know, it's like you don't have to. It's just obvious, right, that we can't go on living on this earth the way we have been living, and that you know, we need to protect the environment in order to protect ourselves and to protect our future and to protect our children. And we're, you know, many also indigenous groups from all over the world have had prophecies for this time. And they talk about this time of chaos that precedes the transformation. And so we're actually living, I believe, right now through that time of chaos. And we are, like, all of life hinges on this moment, this very moment we're living through, to reconnect back to nature, to honor these ways. And then, you know, it's both this ancient and futuristic, and it's coming together with the spirit and the science is what's going to bring us forward.
I agree. I think we see so many more connections between the past and the present and the future now coming into discussions at all levels, and the importance of getting back in touch with the ways we used to connect with nature is so important for our future. So thank you for sharing that. Sibylle, in Germany, forests are a major part of German identity. There are forests all around the country. People really appreciate them. It's what people do on Sundays here in the country, is they take walks in forests. But they were once seen as a mystical refuge for city dwellers in the 19th and 20th centuries. That's something that you've said in your research. Do you think forests in Germany are still seen as mystical places?
Mm-hmm. That's an interesting question, and hence my PhD is focusing on the present. So the method I use to find out how people nowadays perceive and construct their forest spaces was a method called go-along interviews. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's pretty much a combination out of participatory observation and qualitative interview. So you literally walk along or go along with your participants in their or on their forest walks. So thinking back on the walks I did there with approximately 25 individuals varying between 1 hour to actually 4 hours, I certainly can say that there has always been something special about the forest and the individual in the connecting wise. So they took me on their journey into their forest, and I don't mean like forest as an ownership, but forest as maybe, yeah, a mystical refuge or on their way of perceiving it. So I have straight away a few quotes in my mind I would like to share with you from my studies about individuals and how they perceived forest as their space for potentially Muße, or maybe even their mystical refuge. So there was, for example, one 16-year-old youngster who kept saying, I like going here just to hang out with my friends, just to listen to music, have a chat, simply just so I can be. Or there was an 30-year-old outdoor facilitator, and we walked up this massive hill into the forest, and it was just the borderline between the fields and going into the forest. And here he said, here I can just look down onto the everyday life. Here I can escape to and let the life down there, let the life down there. And I think what he meant, or what you could mean by that, is like, yeah, simply, yeah, refuting or going out of your everyday life and transforming into another life, or transforming into something which gives you some a bigger picture, a nicer feeling and understanding. Where I had another lady, we walked also up a hill, and she did this massive, like this circle with her arms first, and then she said, now I'm here, now I arrived, and here I can be without having to follow certain rules. So I think what forests also be nowadays are spaces that are not restricted by so many rules we have to follow in our everyday life. And not that I say there are no rules. It was one part of my question within my interviews as well. But it's certainly seen and probably experienced less pressured, and you can be more you, or you can be a human being more than you are a human doing. So some might perceive it as a mystical refuge in a place, and some might not. But this is what makes my project interesting in itself, because it's depending on so many variables. So it's depending on how you grew up, or which role did forests play when you were a child, and when you in your childhood, and also the discourses. So my colleague, who is focusing on the historical part, looking into discourses and how they influence the perception of forests nowadays. So depending on whether you grew up in the time of forest decline, or this also improved you in how you perceive forests nowadays. So some might see it as a contra to the everyday world, or some see it as an addition. Some might see it as an escapism from, and therefore an refuge. But not to forget the cultural background of the world we live in now. So whatever historical and culturally role forests played there, this is all imprints in you, and this is what you bring along. So a way for incorporation from the individual view, because we use this place perception theory, we also try to find out how forests can or should be built more Muße friendly in future protection. So how could they look like to help people to perceive the state, or be able to perceive it more than they do nowadays, whether this is possible. So yeah, I think to a certain extent it can be, but it depends on various aspects, and this is what makes it very interesting, I think, to look into them.
Wonderful. I like what you said about forests offering a place to be a human being, not a human doing. That's great. Dr. Ching, so moving on, shinrin-yoku is so widely hailed for its health benefits, which you touched on before, and the chemicals trees emit called phytoncides, they just have so many benefits, from reducing our blood pressure to boosting our immune systems. The bacteria in the soil helps our immune systems and helps our brains. Could you go deeper into detail about how the chemicals in forests affect us, and also how we receive these chemicals? Is it through our breathing? Is it through our touching? Do we just absorb them from the air? Could you tell us a bit more detail about the chemicals of forests?
Okay. In fact, the chemicals in forest is also called the phytoncides, like arpinine, D-limonene, many chemicals. So phytoncides are the nature oil within a plant, and part of a tree's defense system. So this tree releases the fungicide to protect from the bacteria, insects, and fungi. So fighting is nothing for the plant, and the side is means kill. So the plant kill something, kill the bacteria or kill the fungi of the insect. So in fact, fungicides are also part of the communication pathway between the trees. So the way trees talk to each other by fungicides. So the concentration of fungicide in the air depends on the temperature of the weather. and the Qing Li that take place throughout the year. For example, the warmer is it, the more fighting signs there are in the air. So we can receive this chemical fighting signs by breathing, also touching, and absorbing from the air. So in fact, there are many beneficial effects of fighting signs or hormone health. For example, fighting signs also can reduce your blood pressure and lower your stress and stress hormones. Also can increase the immune system with the increase of the natural killer activity, very similar to the force bathing. So also can increase the anti-cancer protein and increase the activity of parasympathetic nerve or the rest and recovery part, and reduce the activity of sympathetic nerve, also known as the fight and flight. So very similar to the shinrin-yoku. So fighting signs is a key point because people enjoy force bathing by 5 senses. Sense of the smell. Fighting signs is the sense of the smell. So it's very important. In my experiment, about 50%, half of the effect from the fighting sign. So from the smell. So other 4 senses about 50%. So fighting signs are very important for the force bathing.
Mm-hmm. And just a quick follow-up on that. When we are forest bathing, what's the best way to absorb the most of these? Should we walk barefoot? Should we touch trees? Should we simply just stand there and be still? How can you get the most health benefits while you're forest bathing?
So first, you have to use your 5 senses, engage your 5 senses. Use your 5 senses to see the beautiful scenery and hear some forest, we call the forest landscape. Also good smell from the trees, from the plants, like fighting sign. Also we can touch trees and put your whole body in the forest atmosphere. This is also a sense of the touch. And also the sense of taste. So you taste the fresh air in the forest. You also can eat the food and fruits from the forest. So key point is 5 senses. 5 senses is the very important for the forest bathing practice.
Okay. 5 senses. Thank you, Dr. Ching.
And another point is you have to make a plan that suit for your physical activity. You cannot get tired. If you get tired, there will be produced some stress hormone. So there will be a negative effect. So very slow walk, and just be in nature. Don't get tired. It's very important.
We're tired enough in our daily lives anyway.
Yeah.
Our forest bathing should be kept away from that. Thank you. Julia, in your book, you mix some of the science that Dr. Ching has just described to us with more spirituality, which you also discussed a few minutes ago. And you encourage readers to even perform small rituals and communicate with the forest, sometimes speaking with the plants. So when the health benefits and the science of forest bathing is so proven, you can research that, you can put that in numbers and on paper. Why is it also important to use our time spent forest bathing for spiritual purposes as well?
Yeah, totally. So for me, it's not that it's important, it's just that it happens. And one of my favorite studies around forest bathing is that 1 minute of looking up at a tree increases sense of awe. So they did a study where people looked up at a tree versus looking at a building. And people who looked at trees had a sense of awe. And sense of awe is that feeling of connected to something bigger than yourself. And that leads to greater collaboration and creativity. And then also, as Dr. Li was saying, you engage your 5 senses. And as you engage your 5 senses, we actually have more senses, and we have the sense of intuition. So our sense of intuition heightens, and we're able to tap into the subtle. And we're not in our heads, like so often we spend all our time in our heads, in that fight or flight, in that kind of state of anxiety. And when we actually relax that, we're able to tap into something bigger and see beyond and feel beyond and have a knowing beyond. And that to me is where the spirituality comes in. It's that what I talk about when I say like I felt called to certain forests, is that I actually was like, oh, I have to visit this place. And it's a knowing that comes from somewhere deep inside me. And this isn't something that I went into the forest knowing. It's something that I discovered once I spent more time in nature. And then I also have found that these rituals, and I call them invitations, because really there's no right or wrong way. And if any of these things are like, you know, you don't want to do and you just want to sit under a tree, that's totally fine, and you will get all the benefits of doing that. But what I found is that we have become so disconnected that many people don't know how to go into the forest. You know, and they know that they can go on a hike with friends, but they don't know how to just be. And so these are ways of being that I offer. And I found that it's really helpful, different little invitations that you can do. You know, because, and even for me, when I first went in, I wasn't sure what to do, and I had to kind of learn myself and learn from different teachers. And that's what I'm sharing, and it's become a really important part of my process. And so it's, you know, like when I'm trying to make a decision on something and I don't know what to do, I'll go and I'll ask a tree. And to me, it's like, it's also about connecting to your heart. So being in nature connects us to our hearts. Everything on the planet is connected to this electromagnetic energy, and we have that also, and it goes to the human heart. And so the more time we spend amongst nature, the more tapped into our heart knowing we are. And you can actually practice that while you're in nature. When you say, okay, follow your heart, where does it lead you? And it might lead you to a tree, it might lead you to a spot of sun. And so these are ways that, you know, it's part of that rewilding. It's part of that, you know, getting out of these rules and regulations that we're taught as kids and going back to that sense of childlike wonder.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Thank you. Sybilla, branching off of that a bit, your research also focuses heavily on the individual's connection to forest and nature. So while also preserving communities, connections to nature, and societies as a whole, why is it important that we also encourage individuals on a very personal level to have emotional connections with forests?
Mm-hmm. So we just heard about from Dr. King as well, like the positive effects of interacting with nature have been verified in several studies. They can include cognitive benefits, restorative effects provided by experiencing the natural environments, what colleagues even within Germany found out, or from Sweden, or even positive effects on the brain activities, and also, as Julia just said, the heart. So in general, I think we should enhance people to feel more home and responsible for nature and forest. And this brings me back to one working principle within outdoor education, which is one of my backgrounds. So when you encourage people to take responsibility and feel responsibility, the more responsibility you have about something, the more you want to look after it, and the more you feel you want to do something for it. And also, obviously, the more you feel you are able to create change and influence it. So I want to view this from two different sides. Viewing it from the pretty rational side, we want to do something for recreation in our nature forest, or protecting it, or even regarding climate change, then we need to get individuals out and we need to get them involved and felt responsible for doing something, and also allowing them to feel that they're able to change, and away from the rational view, as you just said, Gabrielle, and as you just asked regarding the individual and personal or emotional one. So as Julia just said, we humans, we live once in harmony with nature, and we are part of nature. So we live in caves, and we lived with this cyclical time perception more than with the linear one, what we have to face now in our most of our everyday lives. So there is plenty of research done on the health aspects for forest, whether these are terpenes, like Dr. King just said as well, or the color of green, or whatever resonates with you. But our lives are happening more or less in artificial surroundings. And I think the best example is also when you look at the decrease of nature experience in early childhood, and also the lack of the usage of playgrounds nowadays. So I don't want to say that technology and our very well-developed world is bad or toxic, but I think there is a saying which means the dose makes the poison, and I think in a balanced way. So having the ability to still connect and to still be in this empty Muße spaces without having to do something. It's very important to have them as well, not as in contra to our everyday life, but in combination. So whether there is a lot of evidence that exposure to nature, nature is good for health and well-being, there has always been, has also been an aspect that is like for pro-social behavior. So whilst you be outside, whilst you resonate with the nature and forests, you're not just on your own. You also improve your social behaviors there. So we humans are like animals evolved to make sense in the natural world, and this embeddedness in nature can often be forgotten and overlooked. So mentally, and this is what Julia just said, I think, we can become disconnected from nature because we are deeply embedded in a human-made world, which is great, which is a huge development of us. But as I said, again, from a human being, we more and more develop into a human doing. So nursing research is showing that knowing and feeling this connection with nature is also good for us, and it helps us bringing out the wider health benefits of exposure to nature. So knowing your place in nature brings meaning and joy to you. So being connected is associated with a greater pro-nature conservation behavior and our own well-being. So having a connection with nature is beneficial for the well-being of us, but also for the well-being of the nature. So we are technically in need. We have a genetic and biological need for a natural world. And artificial urban environments are new to us, and we have an unconscious need for this more of natural environments within them. Again, I'm not saying that they are bad, but I think the combination out of those. And we shouldn't also affiliate our connection with nature now based on our past and that we have been there or that we were coming from there. So we should view it from here and from now, and the urgent and the need we have. And bringing this all back for a moment to my project, if there is a phenomenological approach and perspective from an author called Merleau-Ponty, who wrote about the flesh as a collective term for the flesh of the human body and the flesh of the world, and highlight interconnection between the perceived and the perceiver. So we are embedded in the landscape. Our body, pretty much described by Merleau-Ponty, is the vehicle of being in the world. And yeah, I think our mind and environment, they operate as a coupled system more than shouldn't be seen as separated. And what else do I want to say? I think relating also to what both of you said as well, like the senses are so much more active and so much more alert and all questioned or challenged at the same time, rather than if you being somewhere inside and just having to either listen or watch or so this is another big reason which I think is very beneficial to increase and enhance this individual connection. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Sybilla. Julia, going back to the role of forests among Indigenous communities, can you speak a bit on how preserving forests can help preserve the identities and histories of communities? And I know that later this year you mentioned you're leading a forest bathing trip down to the Brazilian Amazon to bring people from Western culture, from California and other members of your forest bathing club down to the Brazilian Amazon to kind of mix the two cultures there. So what are some ways that forest bathing helps preserve Indigenous communities and also bring those communities to other cultures?
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm joining forces with Pachamama Alliance, which is an organization that has been bringing people down to Ecuador to on transformational journeys to the Amazon to spend time with different Indigenous tribes who have been down there, who've lived there forever. And so this October 28th, November 10th, I'll be gathering a group of people to do forest bathing to go down to the Amazon. So first I want to say for anyone listening, if that's something you're interested in, please follow up with me. And really how this started was the Achuar, they had this understanding that for them to preserve their original ways, they needed at this point outside support, because bigger forces were coming in trying to garner the value of their forests for resources, when really they have an understanding that the forest has value, is invaluable, has value beyond any of the trees, any of the resources. And because it's not only important for their way of life, but it's actually the lungs of the earth. And so, when trees are like help us breathe. And this forest is considered how the planet breathes. And so it's beyond just preserving their way of life. It's part of preserving the planet, which we're all talking about, is so important where we're at this point. And so there's, it's like I keep going back to this because it's so important, but it's our existence on this earth at this point requires not like a going back, but a joining together with Indigenous groups and a respect and a learning from their ways of being. And as we come into forest bathing, as we start to understand the value in ourselves of being in nature, and how much, when we slow down enough in our daily lives to understand, first of all, how so much of the disease that we experience is created from a disconnection from nature. And then we come into an understanding of society and groups that have been talking about this and have had this knowing forever. And this is true for around the world, different practices. We can come together as humans on planet Earth and be actually a beneficial species and help be part of this preservation and restoration and regeneration of the planet, and not part of this extractive force.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And then Dr. Ching, beyond what we already know about forest medicine and the health benefits of forests, what else do we have left to learn, and what are some unexplored health benefits from forests that are still under research and could yield a lot of positive results?
Yes, in fact, we have conducted many researchers on the forest bathing, and I have published this book. This is forest medicine. Yeah, it's many data. Yeah. Also, I have conducted many research, but there are still some projects need to be investigated. For example, the effect of forest bathing on the hormones or the we also call the endocrine system. For example, the effect of forest bathing on the serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin, because those hormones are very important and related to the depression. So this is very important project. The second one is I have found the many benefits of the forest bathing, but it needs to be established preventive method for the diseases, for some hypertension, depression. And also, we should establish the forest bathing as a treatment measure for some diseases. I think it's better for the depression or for the hypertension, because walking in the forest can reduce blood pressure about 7 to 8 mmHg. It's a very good effect. And also because my major is rehabilitation medicine, so I also want to apply the forest bathing in the rehabilitation medicine. For example, in fact, I have a dream. I want to build a hospital in the forest, so people can take rehabilitation in the forest. So I think there are still many projects that need to do conducted.
I hope you build the hospital. I would certainly go if I need to. Thank you for sharing. So now we have some questions from the audience in the last couple minutes that we have. Let's see. So this one, I'll put this to you, Julia. Why do you think, and we were speaking before the discussion started about how there are so many books coming out about forest bathing right now, and you hear about it on podcasts, and it's just getting more and more attention from popular culture. Why do you think that shinrin-yoku and forest bathing is trending at the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think it's a trend. I think it's actually something bigger. And I think it's, we've all come into this through our personal, our personal journeys, and it's led us all here. And it's, what I say is that, some people might say meditation, not for me, yoga, not for me, but no one says nature is not for me, because we, and we are, like I said before, we are nature. And so we feel, this biophilia, this natural connection and love for it. There is an exception if you grew up in the city without any connection to nature, or if you have trauma through past generations of things in nature, or things of, there might be, that might make you more afraid or not want to be in nature. But especially if as a child you were able to create space and be able to spend time in nature, then as you go into adulthood, it will always be a place that you can come back to find solace. And so I feel that it's just where we're at in society, and especially as we spend more and more time, we spend most of our time indoors and up to 13 hours a day looking at screens between our iPhones and our computers. And we can go, throughout human evolution, we spent 99.9% of our time walking on the earth, sleeping on the earth, standing on the earth. And it's really only been this blip of the past couple hundred years where we haven't been connected. And now we can go days or weeks without ever making contact with the surface of the earth. You go from your home to your car to your office. And so, and this has all happened really fast, when you consider the course of human evolution. And so we're kind of realizing this, and we're all waking up to it at the same time, which is why we see so many books. And I really believe that it's a movement forward. It's not a trend that's then going to disappear. It's really part of where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. I hope so. I hope so. Thank you. Dr. Ching, a couple of our listeners have asked a few more technical questions, and I'll put two to you at the same time. One is one of our listeners is asking more about the anti-cancer protein productions when we're in forests. If you could speak a bit more on that and describe more the anti-cancer properties of forests. And then someone else was asking in question number 2, if the chemical production rate differs by different species. So if certain trees or the size of a plant affects how many chemicals they emit into the air.
Mm-hmm. So, in fact, the fourth page, I conducted several experiments at why is 2 night, 3-day forest bathing can increase the natural killer activity and the anti-cancer protein in natural killer cells. And this effect lasted more than 30 days, about 30 days. So if you take a 2 nights, 3-day forest bathing, so you can keep your immune system, immune function always in higher levels. So about 50% of the effect is from the phytoncide, from the chemicals. We call the aroma or call the phytoncide. And it is true. This phytoncide is different from tree species to tree species. Usually the conifer, Japanese cypress, Japanese cedar will produce more phytoncide. So in Japan we have lot of Japanese cypress and Japanese cedar forests. So those forests have bigger effect on human health.
Mm-hmm. Are there any plants that we can, or any smaller species that we can put in our homes or on our in our gardens that are good at producing phytoncides as well, bringing them more into our daily lives?
Yeah, usually bigger tree will produce more phytoncides. Lots of tree. So there's the density of the tree and the area of the forest are very important. But some plants, like flower, also can release some smaller amount of the phytoncide. Some flower, roses also can, roses and some plants about flower also produce. But the amount of the phytoncide is less than the tree. So bigger trees have more, phytoncide.
Is it older trees too? Like do old growth forests?
Yeah, older tree, bigger tree will produce more phytoncide. Mm-hmm. For example, in Japan, in Yakushima, we have a very older tree, Yakusugi, about 7,000 years old. That tree will produce more phytoncide.
Mm-hmm. Which is yet another reason to preserve our existing forests and really conserve the old growth and first growth forests that we have. Thank you. And then our last question I can put forward to you, Sibylle. We have a couple listeners who have been asking about the use of forest bathing in developing countries. And perhaps you can speak on how this concept of Muße and just being in a forest, how that can apply, not just in Western countries such as Germany and the US, but in developing countries as well.
So, if I understand it correctly, well, Muße and Muße perceived wherever you go doesn't depend on whether it's in developing or like a Western country. So, I think it is, it is down to you and your perception and the surroundings, and it can be, there is plenty of literature out of our research collaboration already, what explains how Muße got developed, how and in our paper, as I said, which will be hopefully published soon, we're going to introduce in how place perception and space making works and how this can be all related together. But there is no real reason why it shouldn't be working in developmental countries or areas. So it's just more a go out and explore it and let it happen. And if you understand Muße, how I explained it in the right way, then you might find yourself having a Muße moment whilst we had this digital summit, because it could just like creep up from behind you and surprises you, and it's just there without an expectation. So yeah, just go and give it a go.
Great, thank you. Well, it's already been an hour and 5 minutes, so we can wrap this up now. Thank you all for your wonderful comments to the speakers. We've heard the very medical aspect of forests and the health benefits in very technical terms. We've heard the spiritual and the emotional and the personal connections that we have to forests and why it's so important to maintain those. And then we've heard about just letting go and letting time stop to exist in forests and how important that is as well. So thank you all very much. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining and for offering your comments and your great questions. And we have our next Global Landscapes Forum is taking place in Kyoto on May 13th. You can also tune in online in a very similar platform such as this and listen to whatever portion you feel like, and you'll also get to learn all sorts of fun things like you learned in this digital summit. So thank you so much everyone for joining, and we hope to see you at our next digital summit. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you.